So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen, and I always do a PowerPoint for these. And as I said before, you will receive a copy of this. So don't worry about writing frantically. Okay. Okay, so can you see PowerPoint? Yeah. Okay, very good. Okay, so I'm going to enter the slideshow. So I think it gives you a little bit bigger of a screen. Yeah. Okay, so this is just reminding us of what we're doing. Okay, and I just wanted to review this, and some folks have been here for just one, some for a couple. But when I send you the PDF of this slideshow, you'll have all these links. And we kind of started off doing these mantra intensives back in October. And I was inspired by our community Havan. So when we do the summertime Havan together, we were all reciting the Mahamrityunjaya together. And some people were shy to speak the mantra. And I thought it would be nice to have a resource where you could really look at pronunciation. So there are classes that go much more in depth on the history of these mantras, more esoteric meanings behind them. My focus here is really to make you a confident practitioner. So to feel like that you can, either in a group or in your own practice, either out loud or in your head, feel really comfortable with the sounds of the mantras. Okay, so we did the Mahamrityunjaya and the Gayatri, and these are two Vedic mantras, meaning they come from the Vedas, that are a very important part of this tradition. And then we did a class in April on the prayers of the tradition, where we looked at the 4 smaller prayers that are recited in the ashram morning and evening. And then in the prayers of the tradition, there are 2 longer prayers, and I'll show that on the next slide, that really needed their own class because they are lengthy. So we did the evening prayer in May, and this is the morning prayer today. If you want to hear any of them, down at the bottom of the screen, I have a link to our Sanskrit class page. So we have a pretty informal at this point study group for Sanskrit at HIB. And this is a page that has all kinds of resources on it. So we have audios, we have PDFs, I have links to some good dictionaries and other websites that are fun for Sanskrit enthusiasts. So that page is open. You can go take a look at it, see what's on there. Okay. And before I send this out to you, I'll put the link for the morning prayer in here as well. Okay, so we've seen this slide before, but I'm just giving you a sense of what we're doing in this series. And I should mention too, from the previous slide, that we're pretty much now done with the most important mantras that we practice, right? So the Sri Sukta is another one that could be part of a mantra intensive. It's really long compared to what we're looking at. And I think Sarah had proposed the idea of doing a pronunciation practice study group with it, maybe. So that's a mantra that has become very important maybe in the last 10 years in practice, all right? But what we're seeing here, along with the Gayatri and the Mahamrityunjaya, are our core mantras. So if we look at the morning, so at the ashram in the morning, these 5 prayers are said together. And we did 1, 2, 4, and 5 as prayers of the tradition. Today, we're going to pull out the prayer at dawn, or the morning prayer, and look at that by itself. Then in the evening, the Guru prayer is repeated, peace prayer, and the prayer for harmony, as well as the evening prayer, which is number 4, and that one we've already covered. Okay, so the morning prayer, where is it from? So a lot of our mantras that are said as part of the prayers of the tradition are called Shanti mantras, which means peace prayers, and they come from the Upanishads. The morning prayer and the evening prayer have a different source, which is Adi Shankaracharya. And Shankaracharya is considered one of the most influential Indian philosophers. So he is someone that lived and taught in the 8th century, and he is a very important teacher in this tradition. Okay. He was responsible for defining and systematizing the spiritual tradition of Advaita Vedanta. a school of Hindu philosophy that emphasizes non-duality and the unity of all existence. Okay, so at its core, the Himalayan tradition is an Advaita or non-dualist philosophy, right? So one reality. Shankaracharya traveled India teaching the principles of Brahman, Atman, Avidya, Karma, and Moksha. He also wrote authoritative commentaries on many important spiritual scriptures. So, for example, his commentaries on the Upanishads are considered authoritative, right? So, a really good resource for understanding those teachers. Shankaracharya is credited with reviving interest in Vedanta in India at a time when Buddhism and other alternative philosophies were gaining a strong following. So people were moving away from the Vedic fire ritual and some of the more external ways of practicing at that time and becoming more interested in inner life. So Jainism, Buddhism, these kinds of philosophies were starting to take a really strong foothold. And Shankaracharya made it his goal to remind the Indian people what a rich history they have, right? So reminding them of the teachings of the Upanishads, of the significance of the Vedic rituals beyond just asking for stuff, right? That they have a really deep reason for being done, right? A really a way of kind of aligning oneself with nature and with the self, right? That they weren't just about materialistic gains, because that's where it was headed. So people were commissioning these big, fire rituals, especially rich people, princes, in order to win wars or gain riches or have 10 sons. All right. So he was also reminding people that this isn't why these practices were developed, right? That there is a greater value to them. So two of his writings, the morning prayer and the evening prayer, were brought into our prayers of the tradition. All right. So then at this point, the people that are here have some Sanskrit background, and I've been doing this little mini reminder every single mantra intensive. So I'm going to go through it. And if you have any questions, please put on your microphone, let me know. Otherwise, I'll do it a little bit quickly in case it's repetitive. But I think that when you're going to read a good transliteration of any mantra, it's not that hard if you know what is different from pronouncing English sounds, right? And Sanskrit is an Indo-European language. It's really not that different, not that exotic of a language if we just know how to read the transliteration. So transliteration means written in English letters, right? Of course, you could read it in Devanagari too in the script, but written in English letters, but with some kinds of markings on them, dots, lines. These markings are called diacritics, and they change the sound quality of the letter they mark. Okay. So vowels are always an important thing to understand because they're really the nucleus of each syllable, right? And in Sanskrit, there are 4 short, simple vowels. And they sound like a, I, U, R. A, I, U, R. And so each short simple vowel has a corresponding long simple vowel. And long is shown by this line above. So you see how there's a line above. So if you see a vowel with a line above it, it just means make it twice as long. There is a long version of R, but you never see it. So we don't even worry ourselves about it. So the long simple vowels sound like A, I, U. Okay. And then there are also 4 complex vowels. And what that means is they're not one simple sound, but it's a sound that shifts as it's being pronounced. And they are A, I, O, ow. So you can see that the sound quality changes. It starts off like A, almost like moving from an ah to a ya. And I, oh, ow. Okay, so complex vowels travel. They travel in your mouth. Okay, the other thing we're going to see in transliteration of a Sanskrit mantra is an M with a dot under it. You might also see an M with a dot above it. They're exactly the same thing. The convention is more commonly M with a dot underneath, but don't let it throw you. And all that means is that we're going to use a sound practice called Anuswara. And Anuswara means look at the vowel in front and nasalize it. Okay. So if you see an M dot after an O, it sounds like Om. With the letter A, it would sound like Eem, Aum, Okay. So it's not really the letter M. An M dot just means nasalize the vowel in front of me. Okay. An H with a dot underneath is a sound practice called Visarga. Visarga means look at the vowel in front of me and aspirate it, which means to let some breathy sound come out afterwards. The only thing that's a little confusing with Visarga is sometimes it will make a whole extra syllable and sometimes it won't. Okay, so as an example of that, we have this word namaha. It could be pronounced just namah, namah. Or the A can repeat itself, namaha. Neither one is incorrect. And sometimes it will depend on the recording you're listening to. So if you go on our Sanskrit page and you listen to different teachers recite the mantras, there might be some differences. And again, that's a personal expression. So the same thing with this word for peace can be shanti, shanti, or shantihi. The E can repeat. Okay, so those are our special sounds. And then if we look at these consonants, they're just like English, paying attention to the fact that the letter C sounds like cha. The difference with English is that there is a contrast between aspirated and unaspirated consonants. Okay, so the letter P sounds like P. PH sounds like P. B, B. T, T. D, D. Ch, ch. J, ch. K, k. G, g. And a nice way to test yourself for aspiration is just to hold your hand in front of your mouth. And you can practice, for example, P, 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 P. And the PH version should make a little explosion of hot air into the palm of your hand. Okay. And we do both in English. We aspirate or don't aspirate, depending on where the consonant is in a word. But let's that will be a fun diversion. that comes along with the full description of the alphabet. Just suffice it to know that an H will change the letter. Okay, so in Sanskrit, ka and ka are two completely different letters. In Devanagari, they have completely different symbols. So aspiration is important. And these are all sounds that you make in your mouth, just like English, pretty much. Here are some sounds that we do not make in English regularly, and they have a dot underneath. So there's the diacritic here, which is a dot underneath each of these consonants. And what they mean is retroflex. Turn your tongue back in your mouth, and you're going to touch a spot in your mouth that is right before your hard palate. So if you put your tongue on the back of your teeth and you start to go up, you're going to feel this bumpy ridge. It almost feels like fish scales. And then right before it becomes smooth, right before your hard palate, there's almost a little indentation here. It's like, ah. And your tongue is going to curl back a little bit and touch that spot. Ta, ta, ta. So the retroflex sounds sound like ta, ta, da, da, na, sha, sha. Okay. So there are two SHE sounding sounds in Sanskrit. The one that's just like English is S with this accent mark on it, sha. With the dot underneath, it's the retroflex version, sha. So it goes, sha, 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 sha. And again, these are two completely different letters in Sanskrit. In Devanagari, they have completely different symbols. And that's why it's really important to get a good transliteration of something, because when people are being either sloppy or just trying to be easy, they'll translate both of these as just an SH and just write it SH and not differentiate between an S dot and an S accent, and you won't know. So in the world of transliteration, there's all different kinds of levels of specification, all right? And ideally, everything you're going to see here, I used all the conventions, right? But in some versions of mantras, people will try to be easier and they won't mark distinctions, which is, it makes sense in some ways because you don't want to be too scary. And if you haven't seen this, if no one's explained transliteration to you before, and you open up a mantra and there's all these lines and dots, you might be like, oh, forget it, right? So trying to make it easy on English speakers is kind, right? But if we want to be exact with the pronunciation, we need these markings to be accurate. Okay, the other important thing is the difference between V and W. There isn't one. So in Sanskrit, V and W are the same sound. And again, it's going to depend on the recording you're listening to, which one you'll hear. And this drove me insane when I first started trying to study the sound system because I was listening. And I had some speakers where I thought, well, this is a va, and other speakers where it sounded just like a wa. And it took a little bit more study to realize that neither was wrong. Okay. And then I'm just reminding you that the C sound sounds like cha, not any of the other ways we use C in English, the letter C. Okay. And then the R in Sanskrit, and Bonnie, I largely added this for you. I was going to just leave it the English R, but she was hearing it sounds more like a trill. Ra, ra. So not ra, 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 ra. Okay. And if you have just this much knowledge of transliteration, you're good to go with anything, any mantra. Okay. And before we actually get into the morning prayer, I'm going to give you just a little bit more information about looking at a new mantra. So if you have what I just showed you, that much understanding of transliteration, anything you get, you can speak without hearing it. Okay, so I used to tell students you need to find a recording, right? But Sanskrit is so precise that you don't actually need to find a recording. If you can divide your words into syllables and mark their stress. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about these two rules quickly, and this will arm you for anything you ever want to learn. And I actually did this with the Sri Sukta when I learned it. You take your words and you divide them into syllables. So some Sanskrit words are, 12 inches long, right? And you think there's just no way to ever say this word. It's so long. And especially compound words, right? It could be a paragraph long. So before you give up, divide them into syllables and they become very manageable. So that's the best way to learn a new word. And there is a rule for syllable boundaries. So the rule is, first of all, knowing that each vowel is the nucleus of its syllable. Okay. So knowing that as you're going across a word and you want to divide it, and you probably did this in middle school in English class, right? For words into syllables. If there is one consonant between two vowels, it will go with the syllable to the right. It will begin the next syllable. If there is more than one consonant between vowels, the first goes with the syllable to the left, and all the other vowels go right. Okay. And when you get used to this rule, you can divide syllables, no problem. So I took this word indriya, which means sense, right? A sense. And using this rule, I would look for vowels. I would say, here is letter I. And there are 1, 2, 3 consonants before the next vowel. So my rules would say the first consonant goes left. All other consonants go right, D-R. Okay, so I have these 2 syllables. And then vowels E and A have 1 consonant between. If there's 1 consonant, it goes right. So looking at this word, I can use these rules to say in, three, ya. Okay. So right away, it's a lot easier to pronounce words. So then we might also want to know where stress is landing in Sanskrit words. And when you're chanting a mantra, again, you could just listen and you'll hear where stress is. Or if you wanted to mark it for yourself, especially with something that you might not have a recording of, there's a rule for that. So that's great about Sanskrit. There's a rule for everything. It's not full of exceptions. There are exceptions, but it's not full of exceptions like English. I can't imagine learning English as an adult, right? It would be maddening. So the rule for Sanskrit in marking stress is you always start at your last syllable. And in Sanskrit, the last syllable is never stressed, unless it's the only syllable in the word. Okay, so for a word like cha, it's only 1 syllable, it has to be the stressed one, all right? So for anything more than 1 syllable, it's never the last syllable. And you're going to start moving left, which feels a little funny because Sanskrit, like English, is a left to right language. But for the purpose of marking stress, we're going left. So you'll start at your last syllable and can't be the last syllable, go left. And what you're going to be asking yourself every time you go left is this a heavy syllable? And if it is, you're done. Mark it, move on. If you get all the way to the front of the word and you never found a heavy syllable, it'll be the first syllable. All right, because you'll run out of options. So the question is, what is a heavy syllable? Easier question, what is a light syllable? A light syllable ends with a short, simple vowel. A, I, U, R. A heavy syllable is everything else. Okay. So any syllable you find that ends with one of these 4 vowels will be light. And there are a lot of light syllables in Sanskrit. This is a very popular syllable structure. Everything else will be heavy. And we'll look at an example of that. So stay tuned. Okay, is that good? Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to first look at the mantra in terms of meaning. And we were not going to spend a whole lot of time on that because it could take a lot of time, and we're here to look at sound. But I think it's really wonderful to know what you're saying too. All right, so in our mantras, there's 2 currents running through them. One is what you're saying, and it's good to know that. All right, because it, I think, is a little bit more emotionally evocative. All right, and you may have learned mantras in the past that were bija mantras, where the teacher or whoever taught you the mantra said you don't need to know the meaning. All right, and that's true, because even more important than the semantics or the meaning is the sound. So Sanskrit mantras work on the level of sound vibration. Okay. But these being a little bit longer, it's fun to look at what they mean. And I'm translating them in a way that is very direct, because if you find these mantras somewhere else, somebody will do a nice job translating it for you so that it sounds good in English. And that's not hard to find. So the Himalayan Institute for the Teacher Training Manual has nice translations where somebody puts something together that sounds good. But I think it's fun to see, what does it actually say word for word, all right? And then you can kind of develop your own idea of the meaning, right? Okay, so there are 4 verses in the morning prayer, and this is the first one. Starts out, Prata smarami hridisam spurat atmatatvam. So prataha, in the early morning, smarami, I remember, hridi, in the heart, samspurad, shining, atma tatwam, the heart, I'm sorry, the atman tatwa, or the element of atman. So tatwa means element. So this means something like when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I remember is the Atman shining in my heart. Okay, so this is a really beautiful, beautiful mantra. Okay, and then quite literally word for word, Sach Chit Sukham means being, consciousness, joy. Parama Hamsa, supreme Hamsa, and we'll talk about what that is. Gatim, moving, Turiyam, towards Turiya. Okay, so this Sach Chit Sukham, you may have heard Sach Chit Ananda as well, right? It's a very popular expression, being, consciousness, joy. So Sukham and Ananda are pretty much synonyms. Parama means supreme. Hamsa, the Hamsa is the swan, right? And it's actually part of one of an older logo for the Himalayan Institute with the two swans, right, that are kind of beak to beak, making a heart shape. So the swan is an important symbol, right, in the tradition. And the swan is said to reside at the heart, right, is a metaphor for the Atman or soul. Okay. And this swan is moving towards Turiya. Turiya is another word for samadhi. Okay. So if you've read the Mandukya Upanishad, it talks about the states of being. And so we're going to see that here. And we'll say a little bit more about Turiya. Okay, so Yat Swapna Jagara Shishuptim. So which Swapna means dreaming, Jagara waking, Shishuptim sleeping. Avaiti knows, Nityam always. Okay, so this Atman always knows the states of dreaming, waking, and sleeping. And the Mandukya Upanishad talks about how there are 4 states of consciousness. We are either awake, or we are dreaming, or we are sleeping, right? That's what us normal people do. We move between these 3 states, and the Atman knows all. Okay, so the soul is watching us, is with us, is awake through all of these states, whether we're conscious or not, right? And that's kind of the theme of that Upanishad, is learning to be conscious, dreaming, be conscious, sleeping. And then this 4th state, which is the state of enlightenment, again, I said it's much like samadhi, is turiya. Okay. Tad Brahma Nishkalam Aham. That Brahma or Brahman, Nishkalam, undivided, I am. So I am that Brahma, I am that Atman. Na, not, nacha, and not Bhuta Sangaha, and not just an assemblage of elements. So the word tatwa and bhuta are synonymous pretty much. The practice bhuta shuddhi, sometimes it's called tatwa shuddhi, cleansing of the elements. So I am remembering that I am that. I am that supreme hamsa. I am that consciousness, and I am not just an assemblage of bhutas. I'm not just a whole bunch of elements, right? I'm not just a random being. Okay. So that's what verse 1 says. Verse 2, Pratar bhajami manasam vachasam agamyam. So pratar means in the early morning. Bhajami, I sing. And bhajami is not just singing, but singing praises, right? Of that which is beyond manasam, so of something that is greater than the mind. Vachasam, something that is greater than speech. And this agamya means even beyond that. So this Atman is beyond what the mind can think of or the mouth can speak of. Okay. Vacho vibanti nikila yad anu grahena. And by whose grace, this word anugrahena means with grace, all speech shines. This word vibanti means shines. So this is something, this Atman, this center of self, is beyond anything the mind can think of, beyond anything speech can describe. And yet it's the grace of the self that allows speech to shine or to mean anything, right? To have the power that it does. Yan neti vachanair nigama avochams. So yan who, not this statement, neti. So neti is important, and it appears in other places like the Upanishads, meaning that the Atman is something that is impossible to describe. All you can tell someone is what it's not. Okay, so it's so mysterious and wonderful that there's no way to use your mind or words to describe it, but you can say what it's not. It's not this, it's not this. Neti. Okay. Nigama means of the scriptures, avochams. So the scriptures all describe it as being beyond words. Deva devam ajam achutam ahur agramyam. So that God of gods, Deva Devam, unborn, Ajam, imperishable, Achutam, and called, Ahur means called, foremost, Agramyam. And then verse 3. So you can see they all start with morning reflections. And that's one reason that it's important to do meditation, prayers, reflection in the morning, because it's said to be a time when we're moving out of sleep and the mind is still in kind of a quiet place, right? An introspective place. And doing this practice or this prayer in the morning kind of sets us for the day. All right. So instead of waking up to, here's all the things I got to do. All right. Or here are all the things that are bothering me. You wake up and you remember. And then you go from there. Right. So again, it begins pratar in the early morning. Namami tamasaha param arka varnam. So in the early morning, I salute namami, and that's from namaste, right? Same root. So I bow to tamasaha. You might recognize tamas there, the darkness. So it's the darkness of supreme illumination. So in that darkness of the early morning, in that darkness of the self, is all illumination, right? So it's something that we can't necessarily see with the eyes, right? But within it, it contains everything. Purnam, full. Sanatana padam purusho tamakyam. So this is an example, and we'll see this when we do the pronunciation of one of those words that looks scary because it's so long, but you can divide it up. Okay, and we'll see how to divide that one up. So this Atman is full, and its eternal abode, so where it is always, right? It is never ending, is called Purusha. Yasmin idam jagad ashesha murtau. And another point that's important in Sanskrit is that word order is free. Okay, so each word is marked for its role in the sentence, whether it's the subject or the object, and therefore there's a lot of freedom to put them anywhere. All right, so in English, if I said Mary gives John a book, if I move Mary and John to John gives Mary a book, the whole meaning of the sentence changes. All right. In Sanskrit, it would be Mary, the subject, gives John, the direct or the indirect object, the book. And because they're marked grammatically, they can move around. Okay. So I just want to say that before we translate this line. Yasmin, in whom this idam, Jagad Ashesham, this endless world, Ashesha Murtau, endlessly settled. Okay. So in this Atman or this Purusha, and you'll notice too that Atman and Purusha are pretty much synonyms. So Purusha comes from the yoga tradition, Sankhya philosophy, and Atman comes from the Vedic or Vedantic tradition. And people like Shankaracharya will use both. And we'll see that in a lot of commentary back and forth. Is there a difference if you go really deep into an explanation of the philosophy? Yes, right. But for our purposes here, Purusha and Atman are considered to be the center of self, right? Self with a capital S. Okay, so this Purusha or this Atman in this endless world is endlessly settled, right, in its eternal abode, right, within the heart, Hridi, right, within our heart. And this is Rajwam Bhujangama Eva Prati Basitam Vai. Okay, so Rajwam means like a rope. Bhujangama means snake. So like a snake who's being a rope, Prati Basitam appears. And again, this is a metaphor that we see a lot in yoga philosophy of the coiled rope that looks like a snake. All right. So again, Shankaracharya is referring to the ability to see what is real. All right. So there's a story in many of the scriptures and the Upanishads of someone walking through the forest at night and they see a snake right in the path, and the person is filled with fear, filled with anxiety, starts shaking, wants to run, and then somehow light is shown on the path and they realize it's just a rope. All right. So this is the idea that in our darkness and our tamas, this Purusha shines light. All right. And it is what shows us that it is a rope, even if it appears snake-like. Right. Okay. So really verses 1-3 are the most important part of the mantra. This fourth verse we'll see is only half as long, and it sums it up. And if you're doing Sri Sukta, we know how the last verse is kind of a sum up, right? So same goes for this mantra. So shloka trayam idam punyam loka traya vibhushanam. So quite literally, and again, we need to remember that word order is free in Sanskrit. So very literally, this means shloka, these sacred world, 3 ornaments. So I actually put this in better English in the italics. These sacred 3 verses are the ornaments of the 3 worlds. Okay. So there is a lot of reference to there being 3 levels or 3 worlds. Right? There's the world of the earth, the physical plane, and then there's the atmosphere or kind of the mental plane, and then there's the plane all the way above us, the heavenly plane, the spiritual plane. And that's represented in mantras often as Bhur, Bhuvaha, Swaha, right? The 3 levels. So these verses are the ornaments of all 3 worlds, right? Or the sometimes the word is used, the treasures of all 3 worlds. Okay. So prata kale patyedyastu sagachet param param. So in the early morning time, he who reads or recites these poems, he or she, right, I understand it either way, goes to the supreme abode. Okay, so is it pretty good as far as meaning? Kind of a sense of what it quite literally says. So it's very, very beautiful mantra, speaking to really remembering the inner self. All right. Okay, so now we're going to look at the pronunciation of this mantra with the stress marking in bold. And for some of the other mantra intensives, I broke all the words into syllables, but I'm finding that most of these words are 1 or 2 syllables. And that just makes it hard to read, to have them all divided up. So I left the words together. I took out dashes anywhere that they were showing compound words. So in earlier versions of the mantra, going through this slideshow, you could see words strung together by dashes. Took those out, and I only put dashes in 2 places to mark syllable boundaries in 2 longer words. Okay, so that's what the dashes mean when you see them now. I would like to just look at a couple examples of where we marked syllables, just so we can kind of practice that, and where we marked stress. Okay, and then we'll just go through it. So let's take the example then of this first word I divided up for you, samspurad. Okay, so we have the vowel a and the vowel u, and we're going to look at what's going on in between them. All right, and we said that the first consonant-like sound goes left, so the goes left, and spu goes right. If we look at this word down here, another long word, we have u and u, one consonant in between goes right. Same thing here. Sh appears between u and o, sh goes right. Here we have 2 consonants between the o and the a, so t goes left and this t goes right. This word is a little bit, or this part of the word is a little more tricky. So between the a and the a, we might at first think there are 3 consonants, right? But we need to remember that k is 1 sound. So it's written in English with the letter K and the letter H, but this is 1 sound. K goes left. Other sounds go right. Yum. Mak, yum. Okay, well, that makes sense. Good. Okay, and then let's take a look. Oh, let's look at this one. Here's another longer one. U, jang, gama. Between the u and the a, there's just ja, goes to the right. Between the a and this a, we have and g. Goes left, g goes right. Between this a and this a, we have just and goes right. Okay. If there's 1 consonant, it goes right. If there are more than 1, so there is more than 1, the very first one goes left, all the rest go right. That was our rule. So we'll see that that works throughout the examples we see here. And then the other important thing was the stress marking. So let's take a couple examples of that just to review. In this word, rad, it's never the last syllable, right? So we start as far to the end of the word as we can. So then we go left to spu, and that ends in a short, simple vowel. So no, go left, some. Okay, let's grab this other big word here. Same thing, we start with yum, or we start at the end. It's never the last one. So we are going to keep going left until we either find a heavy syllable or get to the beginning of the word. Mach. Is that heavy? Yes, it is, right? For 2 reasons. It's got a long vowel and it ends in a consonant. Okay. So it's important to recognize that if there is a short, simple vowel, but the syllable ends in a consonant, it's heavy. Okay. This is another longer word. Bu jangama. Ma, light. Nope. Go left. Ga, light. Nope. Go left. Yang, heavy. So we see that is a short, simple vowel, but it makes a heavy syllable because of the consonant on the end. Jang. Okay. So consonants at the end of any syllable, instantly heavy. Doesn't matter what vowels are in there. These are great rules, and this will allow you to work with any mantra without a recording, as I said earlier. If it's tricky or if it's confusing, or if you just need to review, you can always listen to an audio too to kind of reinforce that. So I want to just read through it now for you, and I'm going to overemphasize the stress marking just to be really clear. So I'll kind of bob my head and move my hand to exaggerate where those stress markings are. And I'm going to just read it because trying to do this and to sing it is a little difficult. So let's start up here with verse 1. Prata smarami hridi sam spurar atma tatvam. Sach chit sukam parama hamsa gatim turiyam. Yat swapna jagara sushuptim avaiti nityam. Tad brahma nishkalam aham na cha bhuta sangaha. Sangaha. Okay, so we know it sounds a little bit more like Prata smarami hridi sam spurat atma tatvam Satchit sukham paramahamsa gatim turiyam Yat swapna jagara sushuptima vaiti nityam Tad brahma nishkalamaham Nachabhuta sangaha. And if you listen on the Sanskrit page, you can hear a couple of examples of people that sing better than I do. So there is this beautiful melody to it that you're not hearing so much with the exaggeration. So let's keep reading. Pratar bhajami manasam vachasam agamyam. Vacho vibanti nikila yad anugrahena. Yan neti yan vachanair nigama avochams. Tam deva devam ajam achyutam ahur agramyam. Pratar namami tamasaha param arka varnam. Purnam sanatana padam purushot tamakyam. Purushot tamakyam. Yasmin idam jagad ashesham ashesha Murtau Rajwam Pujangama Eva Prati Basitamvai Shloka Trayam Idam Punyam Loka Traya Vibhushanam Prata Kale Patyed Yastu Sagachet Paramam Padam. Okay. All right, so I hope that was helpful. And again, I will give this all to you in PDF form. So if you want to listen and practice and have this in front of you, this is more helpful with the syllable boundaries and stress marking, or you have the tools to just practice it on your own. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. And I will be getting these resources to you soon. Okay, so if any questions come up now or in the future, feel free to email me. And happy chanting. Okay. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good one.